Okay, good morning, Shabbat Shalom, and welcome. I'm Ross Nichols, and I am very pleased to be here with you today. You are with us live for a Sabbath morning scripture study. We are going to follow this class with a live discussion on the topic, on the subject that I'm talking about today. So if you're in the know and you've been following us for a while, then you probably already have that Zoom link. The call is going to be on Zoom. But don't worry, if you're new here and you just found us and you say, man, I'd really like to be in that discussion, have no fear. You'll be automatically redirected. You will watch the rest of us have fun in another room, but you'll be able to watch it from YouTube. My class today is based on a subject that is mentioned in the Hebrew Bible in all three sections. So we're going to find references to the subject that I'm talking about today in the Pentateuch. We're going to find references in the prophets section, and we're going to find references in the Psalms. But not only is the subject that I'm addressing today, not only is it found in the Hebrew Bible, in the Tanakh, but it's also found outside the Tanakh. It's found in the Christian New Testament. It's found in the Quran. It is found in rabbinic literature. It's also found in some deuterocanonical works and some apocryphal works. So what I find interesting about this subject today is that the Jewish sources, Christian sources, Muslim sources, all Islamic sources, all discuss the topic that I'm talking about today. Now, what I find even more interesting is that all of these sources, at least at some level, agree. You heard me right. All of the sources from all the different faiths, at least on one part of what I'm going to talk about today, agree. Now, they may not agree with everything that I say in my class today, but that would never be the case anyways. But what I will tell you is that the thing that they agree on is that God miraculously fed the children of Israel during their wilderness journey. So I am going to be talking today about that miracle food according to the pen of the biblical writers and later writers who follow those traditions. We're going to be talking today about manna. Manna, typically spelled M-A-N-N-A. And the question is, what is it? What is manna? Reportedly, and you'll need to get your pencil or your pen and your paper out because you're going to have some good notes and some more study to follow up on after this class. But reportedly, the name manna comes from a question that the people had when they first saw this miracle food. So I want to begin this morning in the Hebrew Bible, in the book of Exodus. Go with me to the book of Exodus, chapter 16 and verse 15. Exodus, chapter 16 and verse 15. And I'm going to open mine up not only here, I want to look at it so I can see the Hebrew. It says in Exodus 16:15, when the Israelites saw it, they said to one another, what is it? For they did not know what it was, and Moses said to them, it is the bread that the Lord has given you to eat. What is it? The children of Israel said. And if you look in most standard dictionaries or lexical works or various commentaries, what you're going to find is that this is somehow etymologically, or the etymology of the idea of the word is tied to the question in Hebrew. Now, in Hebrew, where it says, what is it? That Hebrew is going to be manhu, manhu. And if you look in most footnotes, it's going to say, what is it? But the problem is that is not how you say, what is it in Hebrew? That phrase is later in the text. It says, mahu, mahu. So what is it is mahu and not manhu. We're going to talk about what I believe I can show you by the end of this class where that actual name, Manna, comes from, and you will be surprised. You have to stick with us for the class today because we're going to build the case all the way up until the end. But Mahu means what is it, and not Manu, Manhu, as most people will say. In the Hebrew Bible, get this, Manna is never called manna. Now, what do I mean by that? Yes, of course, if you look up the English word, M-A-N-N-A, you're going to find that, I think, 17 times in the Hebrew Bible. And then, of course, it appears in the New Testament, 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 3. You're going to find it in John chapter 6. You're going to find it in the Deuterocanonical works, in the Apocrypha, the Wisdom of Solomon. You'll find it plenty of times. But in the Hebrew Bible, 17 times, we are led to believe that manna is a Hebrew word. And if you just simply look at these 17 references, you think you'll see manna underneath the English, back into the Hebrew. Or you may think, well, it's based on manhu. Well, manhu from Exodus 16:15 only appears there and never again in the Hebrew Bible. From this point forward, from Exodus chapter 16, verse 15, manna, in English, you'll find in the Hebrew as either man or ha-man, the man or man, but never manna. Now, we're going to make some more of this as we work our way through, because I want to know, what is it, just like the children of Israel did. The children of Israel had a question when they saw it, and that is, what is it? I have the same question. There are various theories as to what it is. Moses in Exodus chapter 16 tells us that it's the bread of God. Now, it's here in Exodus chapter 16 that we are first introduced to man. Let's start calling biblical things by biblical names. Let's stop calling it manna and just call it man, because that's what the Hebrew Bible calls it. The children of Israel are in the wilderness of sin, spelled in English S-I-N. It begins with a samach in the Hebrew, so it's not sin. Don't be confused, the Z-I-N or T-S-I-N wilderness. This is the wilderness of sin. It's located between Elim and Sinai. The children of Israel have only just begun their wilderness journey. In fact, we know from the beginning of Exodus chapter 16 that they are only in the second month from the time that they left Egypt at this point in Exodus chapter 16. In fact, it's the 15th day of the second month since they left. And what day did they leave? They left in the first month, and you know that we're almost really only a month into the journey, and here they find themselves at the wilderness of sin between Elim and Sinai. Now, here is the context for the story of the miracle bread. Now, we have two sources, by the way. I showed some of this last week. I really want you to get this, that if a lot of people read just from Genesis 1 through Deuteronomy 34:12, and they miss some very important things. So, for instance, we have different sources within the Pentateuch, and one example is going to be made clear today. I showed a little bit of this in the chart that we called the synoptic synopsis last week. You can download that on the video from last week on a video in the description by the same name, a synoptic synopsis. And in that chart, 24 pages in length, there are two stories that seem to be the same story from different sources. One is in Exodus chapter 16. The other is in Numbers, in Bamidbar, Numbers chapter 11. Now, what I want to do is I want to look at Exodus chapter 16 and verse 3. Exodus 16 and verse 3. And it says, the Israelites. Now remember, we're in the wilderness of sin. We're only a month into the journey, and the Israelites said to them, If only we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots and ate our fill of bread. I'm reading from the NRSV. For you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. So they're hungry. It's a month in, as you might imagine. Any of you who've ever traveled to the wilderness regions, anything south, if you've been there with me, if you've been on tour, or if you've just seen a real accurate movie, you know that food is not just all over the place. Food is going to be a problem. The biblical writers knew this, and the question that the Israelites said is, why didn't you just let us die there? At least we weren't hungry, right? That's a natural need of humans, is to eat. Now, what I'm going to propose, and this will make more sense as we go along, I want you to see that there is another source, and I'm going to propose that this is the same story from a different source. It's another complaint of the people being hungry, and you might say, well, they're always complaining about hunger or something. Stick with me. Go with me now to the book of Numbers, Bamidbar, in the wilderness, Numbers 11, verse 4 and 5. Numbers 11, verse 4 and 5. The rabble, saith the NRSV, the rabble among them had a strong craving, and the Israelites also wept again and said, if only we had meat to eat. We remember the fish we used to eat in Egypt for nothing, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. But now our strength is dried up. There is nothing at all but this manna to look at. Now, again, in the chart that I posted last week, you'll see the correlation between Numbers chapter 11 and Exodus chapter 16. But what I want you to do is, I want you to notice now we're going to go back to Exodus chapter 16, and I want to pick up in verse 4 and 5. Exodus 16, verses 4 and 5, and it reads, Then the Lord said to Moses, I am going to rain bread from heaven for you, and each day the people will go out and gather enough for that day. In that way, I will test them whether they will follow my instructions or not. By the way, it says Torah there. I will know whether or not they're going to follow my Torah or not. Verse 5, on the sixth day, when they prepare what they bring in, it's going to be twice as much as they gather on the other days. So here we've got God is telling Moses, here's the way this is going to work. They've complained about being hungry. They're going to go out every day, and I'm going to miraculously feed them. How am I going to do that? God says, I'm going to cause it to rain bread from the heavens. See, it's going to be a miracle that the rain will, for you, plural in Hebrew, bread from heaven. And they're going to gather their daily bread. They're going to gather a portion of bread every day. And part of this is because God is testing them. God wants to know whether or not they will literally it says, walk in my Torah or not. Now, I'm going to build a case that this is anachronistic, that this was written later, so don't go anywhere. Stay with me, be bold, be brave, be faithful, make me stick to the text. I need people around me to hold me accountable, because after this we're going to have a discussion. But I'm going to propose that this is written later, and we're going to prove that. Number one, this is the first proof, is that there is no Torah yet, meaning that they've not even made it to Sinai yet. They've not been given the laws. They've not been given the commandment of the Sabbath. Now, I know that some people might say, hold on, there is a tradition that God gave it to Adam, and Adam gave it down, and they met in a cave, and he taught it to his son Seth, and it was passed down that way. And I know about Genesis chapter 26, where in Genesis chapter 26, verse 5, that God is passing on to Isaac the blessing of Abraham because Abraham obeyed, among other things, my Torah. But in context, we'll see that this is prior to the giving of the Torah. Now, it's interesting, too, that it says that on the sixth day, you're going to have twice as much as you're going to have on the other days, and that's because they're going to learn about the Sabbath. The writer wants us to think at this point that they already know about Shabbat, but they've not been told about Shabbat yet. Now, stick with me on this. Go to Exodus 16, verses 6 through 10. We're just going to go down to the next verses. So Moses and Aaron said to the Israelites, "In the evening you shall know that it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt. And in the morning you shall see the glory of the Lord, because he's heard your complaining against the Lord. For what are we that you complain against us?" And Moses said, "When the Lord gives you meat to eat in the evening and your fill of bread in the morning, because the Lord has heard the complaining that you utter against him, what are we? Your complaining is not against us, but against the Lord." And then Moses said to Aaron, "Say to the whole congregation of the Israelites, draw near to the Lord, for he's heard your complaining." And as Aaron spoke to the whole congregation of the Israelites, they looked toward the wilderness, and the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. Now, notice again in verse 8, in the evening, it says in the evening, flesh. In Hebrew, it's basar, basar. There's going to be flesh in the evening and bread in the morning. This is like eat to your fill. In fact, the word there is like satiate. You're going to be not only full, but happy. And this is the point, is that God is going to bring miraculous food evening and morning, just like house service or room service. Now, look at verse 11, Exodus chapter 16, verse 11. Just scroll down. And it says, "The Lord spoke to Moses and said, I've heard the complaining of the Israelites. Say to them, at twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall have your fill of bread. Then you shall know that I am the Lord your God." You ever read these stories and say, I think they probably should know that already. I mean, they've already crossed through a sea miraculously, and they've seen, miracles up to this point. But what we're going to show is that between Exodus 16 and Numbers chapter 11, we have two simultaneous stories of feeding. We have bread, manna, called manna in English, not in Hebrew, and we have that's in Exodus, and we have the bread in Numbers 11. And we have, in the same order, we have, here's some quail. You want meat? I'm going to give you meat. You want basar? I'm going to give you some meat here until it comes out your nose, says Numbers 11. So Exodus 16, Numbers 11 say bread, bread, meat, meat, bread, bread, bird, bird, okay? Now these are different sources. They're different sources, but they're the same story. They're written by different hands. Look at verse 13 of Exodus 16. Remember, we're only talking about bread, and the people have said, we want meat. We miss fish. We miss all this other stuff. So here we go, verse 13. In the evening, quail came up and covered the camp. And in the morning, there was a layer of dew around the camp. It's almost in Exodus 16, this is just in passing. Oh yeah, the dew came down, and a layer of dew came down, but that was in the morning. But the night before, there were some quail. Well, how many quail? I want you to imagine, we're going to talk about numbers, like the numbers of people. We're going to show you an illustration, hopefully, in a little bit. But the idea is that you have, according to the Pentateuch, you have 603,550 males of warrior age, 20 and up, right? Now, if you add people that are younger than that, people that are older than that, women, children, most people estimate we're talking about 3 million people. How many quail do you need to feed millions of people? Okay, so we're going to go now to Numbers 11. in the book of Numbers, chapter 11. We're talking about quail right now. Verse 31, Numbers 11, verse 31 through 33. Again, this corresponds to what we see in Exodus 16. Then a wind went out from the Lord, or the Ruach, a spirit, if you will, but I think it's wind here. A wind went out from the Lord, and it brought quail from the sea and let them fall beside the camp. About a day's journey on this side and a day's journey on the other side, all around the camp, about 2 cubits deep. I'll come back to that. So the people worked all that day and night, I bet they did, and all the next day gathering the quail. The least that anyone gathered was 10 homers. Wonder how much that is. And they spread them out for themselves all around the camp. But while the meat was still between their teeth before it was consumed, the anger of the Lord was kindled against the people, and the Lord struck the people with a very great plague. Now let me explain something. First of all, how big do you think the camp is? How big could it be, or would it be, if you have? Remember, you got stragglers. They've only been out of Egypt a month. The journey's been going on a month. 603,550 males of warrior age, plus women and children, 3 million. So camp is taking up a good bit of real estate in the desert. Then on the outside of that camp, from the outer edges, the writer tells us, a day's journey one way and a day's journey the other way, so many quail that it takes up a day's journey on either side, and it's 3 feet deep. Now, that's what it says. Now, that's a lot of quail. That's why my remark was when it says that they worked all day and night. Now, the question is, that is a fantastical number. 3 feet deep, a day's journey on either side, piled up. That is a lot of quail. All right, so let me talk about how much it was when they gathered up. The one who got the least, like the one who gathered the least, that person had 10 homers. Now, most Bibles, a good study Bible, I highly recommend the New Oxford Annotated Bible with the Apocrypha, NRSV. It's on my website, rossknichols.com. You can find it. But any good study Bible, or you can Google this, how much is a homer, Homer, in terms of measurement, and you can translate that into what you're used to. So I have people in Europe who listen, and people all over the world, people in the States. So whether you're using metric or imperial, just look it up. Here it is. A homer is 229 liters or 60 gallons. 229 liters or 60 gallons times 10. The one that gathered the least of these quail put in the bucket 608 gallons, or you might, if you like, bushels. I don't know what a bushel is, but according to my sources, 6.5 bushels equals a homer times 10, 65 bushels of birds. Okay, let's get back on the bread. Textual description of the bread comes to us in a couple of places. Go with me to Exodus 16, and we're going to look at verse 14 and 15. Exodus 16, verse 14 and 15. When the layer of dew lifted, there on the surface of the wilderness was a fine, flaky substance, as fine as frost on the ground. And when the Israelites saw it, they said to one another, Manhu, what is this, is the way it's translated. For they did not know Mahu, what it is. And Moses said to them, it is the bread that the Lord has given you to eat. Now, I wonder what it tastes like. Could we get a taste of it? What does the Bible say about how it tastes? Well, it depends on which source you read. We're going to look at both, all right? So we're going to start with Exodus 16, and I want you to go to verse 31. Exodus 16, verse 31. Here we're talking about the taste. What does it taste like? 16:31. The house of Israel called it manna. It was like coriander seed. You can go to your local store. I don't know what kind of store you have, Rouse's we have, or Piggly Wiggly, or Winn-Dixie, or whatever, and get you some coriander seed and get an idea. It was like that. It's like that. By the way, Exodus 16 and Numbers 11 tell us the same clue there. It's like coriander seed. It's white, and the taste of it was like wafers made with honey. All right. So let's go through those again. It's like coriander seed. It's white. Taste of it was like wafers made with honey. Now, go to the other source. We have another writer that tells us, look at Numbers chapter 11, and we're going to go to verse 7 and 8. Numbers 11, verse 7 and 8. Here we go again. Look. Now, the manna was like coriander seed. See, so you have coriander seed, just like we had in Exodus 16. And its color was like the color, this translation says, of gum resin. The color of gum resin. By the way, in Hebrew there, it's bedolach, which is sometimes rendered bdellium. Bdellium. And you can look that up and kind of get a feel for it. The writer is trying to describe what this is like. It's like coriander seed, yeah, maybe a little bit. Exodus says it's white, and then the writer here says, no, it's not white. It's more like the color of gum resin, bedolach. And the people went around, verse 8, and gathered it. Now, this is like a man cookbook. Like if you had, you know how churches or synagogues will put out a cookbook? If you were among the children of Israel, you could put out a cookbook. Here's what you would have in it. You could either grind it in mills or beat it with mortars, and then sometimes they boil it in pots, made cakes of it. Now, here you go. This is what the writer here says it tastes like. Remember, it tastes like wafers with honey in Exodus. Here, taste of it was like the taste of cakes baked with oil. Cakes baked with oil. Okay, so we have some different traditions here. In fact, what this leads to is a rabbinic idea. It's also found in a source I'm going to show you from the Deuterocanonical book, Wisdom of Solomon, that said whatever, this is where myth comes in, really strongly it comes in here, is like whatever, when you put it in your mouth, whatever it is you desired is what it tasted like. See, because they're trying to create this magic. Okay, so look with me, Wisdom of Solomon, and I want to go to, if you don't have this in your Bible, you need this Bible that I'm looking at. Wisdom chapter 16, and let's see. Hold on one second. Let me find it here. Wisdom 16, and it's verses 20 through 23. I'm picking up kind of in the middle of the story, but it says, instead of these things, you gave your people food of angels. So this is like angel food. And without their toil, you supplied them from heaven with bread ready to eat, providing every pleasure and suited to every taste. For your sustenance manifested your sweetness toward your children, and the bread ministering to the desire of the one who took it was changed to suit everyone's liking. You see that? That comes out also in Jewish literature. Like if you're craving, we have Bluebell ice cream here in southern Louisiana. If that's what you're craving, there it is. If you want some nice grilled asparagus, that's what it is. This is the idea. So again, we have differences in color. We have white in Exodus 16:31, bdellium, which could be the color of gum resin, in Numbers chapter 11, verse 7, and so forth. Now, The dew brought the man. So it comes with the dew. Go with me to 16, Exodus 16, verse 31. Exodus 16 and verse 31, and it says the following. It says this, the house of Israel called it manna. I've already read this, but that's okay. It was like coriander seed, and the taste, I'm sorry, I meant 16:13. My bad, sorry. Exodus 16:13 and Numbers chapter 11:9. It says, in the evening, quails came up and covered the camp, and in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp. Verse 14 says, when the layer of dew lifted, there on the surface of the wilderness was this fine, flaky substance, as fine as frost on the ground. So it comes with the dew. You go to bed at night and the dew settles in. Now let's look at Numbers chapter 11, verse 9. Numbers 11, verse 9, says, when the dew fell on the camp in the night, the manna, it says in English, would fall with it. In the Hebrew, it says haman, the man would fall with it when the dew fell. Now, I want to go with me to Exodus chapter 16, verse 16 through 18. Exodus 16 through 18, and then I'm going to pick up the first part of verse 21. This is what the Lord has commanded. Gather as much of it as each of you needs. An omer, not a homer. Don't get your omers and homers confused. A homer and an omer are not the same. Each of you needs, get an omer to a person. Every person gets an omer, whatever that is, according to the number of persons, all providing for those in their own tents. All right, and then the Israelites did so, some gathering more, some less. But when they measured it with an omer, not a homer, an omer, whatever that is, those who gathered much had nothing left over, and those who gathered little had no shortage. They gathered as much as each of them needed. So we got a rule here, an omer for a person. Now I want you to go down to verse 21a. In a minute, I'm going to try to show you what this looks like. If there's a way that we can illustrate what this looks like, I think it's going to be a little more impactful. Now, so we know that each person gets an omer. Now, in verse 21 of Exodus 16, it says, morning by morning, they gathered it. So every morning, now remember, Exodus 16 is set, they're only 1 month in. So this is going to go on for the duration of 40 years in the wilderness, according to the writers. Now, they have to get it in the morning. Remember, so the rule is you go out, every person gets an omer worth, whatever that is, and you're going to then, but you can't have any left over because it rots. It's like maggots or worms become part of this, and it's really stench and horrible. And also you have to worry, you got to eat it quickly, get your sustenance in the morning. Maybe this is a rule, you should eat a good breakfast because it melts if you don't get it. So I'm going to give you a couple of pieces of math to think about, and then we're going to try to show you a little bit more clearly what this would look like in terms of quantity. How much, remember we talked about how deep the quail were. This is another miracle story. An omer is 2.087 quarts, 2.3 liters, or 0.61 gallons. Okay, that's how much an omer is for every person. And let's say we have 3 million people. What does that look like? What does that look like? I want to imagine. Did you get that? You see, I think people tend to imagine a little bit on maybe some shrubs, a little bit on the ground, and they're going out and they're picking up. But this biblical story means to suggest that this is a massive miracle. That Haman, the manna, as it's called, this food from heaven, this angel's food, this bread of heaven, is massive in quantity, to the point that it is 66,795,000 gallons. I mean, think about that. We're talking about how much is it a day? How much is it, imagine, over the course of 40 years? As we say, do the math. But I think a lot of times people read through and they don't really think about how fantastic some of these numbers are. Now, there are other proposals as far as the numbers. For instance, on the number of the children of Israel. We like miracles big. Look, religious people love a big miracle. And you'll hear people say, if it's, my God is a God of big, 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 big miracles. These are big, big, big miracles. That's a lot of bread. Okay, you get the point. Now, again, the leftovers, if you have any, what you're going to find is that it rotted in the sunlight. Look at Exodus 16:19. Exodus 16:19 says, "And Moses said to them, let no one leave any of it left over until the morning." But they didn't listen to Moses. Some left part of it until the morning, and it bred worms and became foul. And Moses was angry with them. All right, so you get this idea that it melts in the sunlight. You got to get it up. By the way, just because this thought, I didn't give this verse to Seth, but I want you to go with me just because it popped in. Look at Deuteronomy chapter 8. I don't think that I gave this one to our main man, but I wanted to touch this. Deuteronomy 8, he humbled you by letting you hunger and then by feeding you with manna with which neither you nor your ancestors were acquainted, in order to make you understand that one does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes out of the mouth of the Lord. The idea here, obviously, is that this massive manna is this is a lesson for the people, is to humble them and to teach them, that you have to trust God. By the way, one more verse. Look down at verse 16, and it says, "And fed you," Deuteronomy 8:16, "fed you in the wilderness with manna that your ancestors didn't know, to humble you and to test you, and in the end, to do you good." The question becomes, when was this story of the manna, when did it become part of the tradition? I already told you that in the Tanakh, we see it in the Pentateuch in two different sources, Exodus 16, and we find it in three sources, Numbers chapter 11, then Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 3, verse 16. We find it in the prophets. We're still going to go through a few more verses. We find it in the Christian writings. We find it in the Quran, Deuterocanonical books. But when did that tradition come into the story? And you say, well, it came in from the beginning. Well, let's see if it came in, when it was written, I guess is the better way to put it. Look at Exodus 16, beginning in verse 22. Exodus 16, verse 22. And it says, "On the sixth day, they gathered twice as much food, 2 omers apiece." And you have to we have to get Seth to do another video to just show you how quickly that is. What do you get on Fridays? Okay. It says they got 2 omers apiece on Fridays, on the sixth day, when all the leaders of the congregation came and told Moses, and he said to them, this is what the Lord has commanded. Tomorrow is a day of solemn rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you want to bake and boil what you want to boil, and all that is left over put aside to be kept until morning. So they put it aside until morning as Moses commanded them, and it didn't become foul, and there were no worms in it. Moses said, eat it today, for today is a Sabbath to the Lord. Today you will not find it in the field. 6 days you'll gather it, but on the seventh, which is a Sabbath, there will be none. On the seventh day, some of the people went out to gather, and they found none. And the Lord said to Moses, how long will you refuse to keep my commandments and my Torah? See, the Lord has given you the Sabbath, therefore on the sixth day he gives you food for 2 days. Each of you stay where you are. Do not leave your place on the seventh day. So the people rested on the seventh day. Now I just want to make a point, and we're going to pick this up in the discussion after my class. I want the question that hits me is this, other than the reference to in Genesis chapter 2, about Shabbat, the Sabbath, the seventh day, and God rested on it and so forth. Other than that, we have no reference of Sabbath until the children of Israel are told about the Sabbath at the giving of the Torah, which is not in Exodus 16. This is too early. And the question to you that I want you to come to me with is this the first introduction of Shabbat, or does it indicate that this was written later after they knew about the Sabbath? Now, don't give up on this idea yet. Don't dismiss it out of hand. I want you to look with me now at Exodus 16, verse 32. Pick it up in verse 32 through 34. Here we go. Moses said, now, the question is, listen to this, watch the clues. Is this written by Moses in the time of Moses or later? And don't answer too quickly. Listen. Moses said, verse 32, this is what the Lord has commanded. Let an omer, we know what an omer is 0.61 gallons, 2.3 liters, be kept of it throughout your generations, in order that they may see the food with which I fed you in the wilderness when I brought you out of the land of Egypt. And Moses said to Aaron, take a jar, put an omer of manna in it, and place it before the Lord to be kept throughout your generations. As the Lord commanded Moses, so Aaron placed it before the covenant, it says, but in Hebrew it's a dut, for safekeeping. All right? So here what we have is Moses. It seems like a very simple thing, but we read over and we miss facts. We miss clues. Take this, keep it throughout your generations so that the children of Israel will know what I fed them in the wilderness when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. Take an omer of it, 2.3 liters, 0.61 gallons, and put it before the Lord, and Aaron put it before the adut. Ladies and gentlemen, we don't have an adut yet. There is no testimony yet, because the testimony, the adut, according to the priestly writer, is the 2 tablets of stone upon which, according to the priestly writer, God wrote his words, his 10 words, with his finger, this side and that. You know the story, right? But we don't have that yet. They're not even to Sinai, and the writer of Exodus 16 is giving us this information. Okay, but there's more. Look at verse 35, Exodus 16, verse 35. The Israelites ate manna 40 years until they came to a habitable land. They ate manna until they came to the border of the land of Canaan. An omer is 1/10 of an ephah. Now, notice that here we are, according to Exodus 16, verse 1, 2, and 3, we're in the second month. They've only been out of Egypt for 1 month, and it says here that they ate it for 40 years, but they're not even chronologically to Horeb, Sinai. So my proposal, and I'm trying to show you what the text says, I know you see this now, this is written by a writer after they've already reached the habitable land. They're in the land. And guess who didn't make it into the land? Moses. So the writer who is penning this to tell us about the manna, Haman, is writing it later. In fact, the man will continue to fall with the dew until when? Until they're in the land. Go with me to Joshua chapter 5, Joshua chapter 5, verses 10 through 12. Joshua 5. While the Israelites were camped in Gilgal, they kept the Passover in the evening on the 14th day of the month in the plains of Jericho. By the way, this is after Moses is dead. On the day after the Passover, on that very day, they ate the produce of the land, unleavened cakes and parched grain. The manna ceased on the day they ate the produce of the land, and the Israelites, get this, no longer had manna. They ate the crops of the land of Canaan that year. By the way, again, just to make sure you understand, the children of Israel ate man, not manna. It doesn't say manna in Hebrew. Nowhere does it say manna. But the manna ceases, Joshua 5, when they crossed into the land. So what we have to do, there are various theories out there. People have said, what is the manna? What was the manna? That's what the children of Israel asked. Mahu. They didn't know what it was. And so people have proposed various things. And some who say, well, I don't necessarily accept miracles. So I think that it was maybe a little bit of, it's sort of an excretion from an insect that is known from the desert. So they're basically saying it's bug spit, that bug spit in mass quantity. How much bug spit do you need? To meet the numbers that are requested, that are demanded of the text, it's a lot. So the question is, you'd think they would talk about the bugs they encountered. But another is that maybe it's some kind of sap from various trees, various plants, various flora that it's in the desert regions, okay? So there are various proposals. But the Bible doesn't say that. And I know people are trying to come up with an answer that they can accept. But that's not an option. The option is, here's what it says, that when the dew came down, so did the man. And it's not easy to come up with another solution. And some people say, look, if you go to the desert, you can still get some of this off of the bushes that grow out in that region. You can still do it today. But guess what? Not according to the Bible. According to Joshua 5, this miracle is done. It's done. Now, I want you to look with me a few more verses just to show you the how much that comes out in the Bible. Look at Nehemiah chapter 9 and verse 20. You gave, the writer says, your good spirit to instruct them, and did not withhold your manna from their mouths, and gave them water for their thirst. So in the biblical book of Nehemiah, which is late, right? They're coming back from captivity in the days of Nehemiah. So this is very much a part of the biblical tradition. It says you didn't withhold. Good spirit to give wisdom is what it literally says, and your manna, your man, you didn't withhold from their mouths. Look at Psalm 78. We have two passages in the Psalm. Psalm 78, and let's look at verse 24. Psalm 78, verse 24. He rained down, v'yamter aleihim. He caused to rain down upon them man to eat, le'echol, and gave them the grain of heaven. The grain of heaven. It's another name for the bread of heaven, the grain of heaven. The word there is dagan shemaim. Mortals, verse 25 says, ate the bread of angels, and he sent them food in abundance. The bread of angels. I like that phrase, the bread of angels. Okay. One more passage. Let's look at Psalm 105. Psalm 105 and verse 40. Psalm 105 and verse 40 says, they asked, and he brought quail and gave them food from heaven in abundance. So the tradition is found throughout the biblical text. It's found in the Pentateuch. It's found in 3 books of the Pentateuch, clearly different sources. Exodus 16, Numbers chapter 11, Deuteronomy chapter 8. All of these tend to be indicative. They have signs, they have clues, they have hints, they have just plain text. I know it goes against in the face of tradition, but as far as reading the text and allowing the text to say what the text wants to say, it says, I'm written later. I know the things I know because I'm writing this later. Doesn't mean that there wasn't a miraculous feeding in the wilderness. Not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is that the text indicates that there are things that were known and there were things that were forgotten. What do I mean by that? Clearly, this Exodus 16, for instance, absolutely, without a doubt, no argument will win against this, that Exodus 16 could not have been written before the children of Israel were in the land, settled and eating of the crops of Canaan. How do I know that? Because the Bible tells me so. In Joshua chapter 5, verse 10 through 12, that when they went into the land on Passover, according to the text, no more manna, no more mine. They ate the crops of the land, and it says it ceased at that time. So don't go out looking for it. You're not going to find it. If you choose to eat something that's on a plant and your God tells you that it's manna, I probably wouldn't do it. Okay. By the time the stories were penned, no one remembered what kind of food they ate along the way. They couldn't remember what it looked like. There seems to be a memory about it being like coriander seed. What color was it? It was white. Bedolach, like gum resin. What did it taste like? Oh, it tasted like honey. It tasted like cakes baked in oil. The miraculous nature of the journey from Egypt required bread from heaven. Because if you take a group, 603,550 males, plus women, children, and so forth, from Egypt, from Goshen, for instance, and you travel all the way to the land of Canaan, however that route looks, you're going to need miraculous food. What precisely that food was or looked like or tasted like or the quantities, those things were not so important. They weren't so important. The important thing that biblical writers want us to know is that a miracle indeed happened. Passed down. Now get this. I believe that passed down from one generation to another, a name for the miraculous food somehow was preserved. We don't have the jar that Moses told Aaron, that God told Moses to tell Aaron to put before the testimony. We don't have the testimony either. It's not been found. The jar is missing, but perhaps in the name Manna, somehow miraculously, and this could be the greatest miracle of our day when it comes to the bread from heaven, is that we know what it was called. A German scholar, a great Egyptologist. I encountered his work because of my work on Moses Shapiro. His name is George Ebers. George Ebers proposed and proved that in Egyptian, the word for food is Manna. Manna. So for some reason, the writers, the tradition, preserved the name Manna from the ancient Egyptian word for food, the miraculous food that God used to sustain the children of Israel for 40 years in the wilderness. Hey, listen, don't go anywhere. Join me in a Zoom call, a discussion. Bring your comments, your question, your rebuttals, your challenges, your thoughts, and so forth. We'll get into everything that you want to talk about within reason, having to do with the subject material here. We didn't go into, it was outside the scope of my class, to go into some of the other literature, particularly the Christian documents and so forth, but we can get into some of that as well. I think it's going to be quite fascinating. I hope you join me. If you can, join me in Zoom if you have the link. If you don't, we can't post it publicly because we have people that are crazy and they do crazy things. We need to know you first. So if we know you, you're in. If you're not in, have no fear. You'll be redirected. You can watch it on YouTube this week. Sign up for the mailing list and you can be in next week. Shabbat Shalom, Shavua Tov. See you next week. Some of you I'll see in the Zoom call.